Ares wasn't the most powerful god on Olympus. He wasn't the smartest, the most respected, or even particularly liked by his own family. But he was the most honest about what he represented, and that made everyone uncomfortable. While other gods dressed up their violence in noble causes and grand justifications, Ares simply embodied war in its purest, ugliest form. No pretense, no glory, just blood, chaos, and the raw brutality that humans pretended to hate but couldn't stop creating. Ares was one of few children born of Hera and Zeus without drama or complications. You'd think that would give him status. The golden child, the heir apparent. Instead, Ares became the family disappointment. Zeus openly despised him. Not the mild irritation he showed other gods, but genuine contempt. When Athena helped Diomedes injure Ares in battle, Ares went to Zeus for help. Zeus responded by saying, "Don't come whining to me. You're the most hateful of all gods who hold Olympus. You love nothing but strife and war and fighting." Why the hatred? Ares represented everything Zeus wanted to distance himself from. Pure, mindless violence, bloodlust without strategy, destruction without purpose. Zeus had fought the Titans and established order. He saw himself as a civilized ruler who used force strategically. Ares just liked watching things bleed. His siblings didn't help his reputation either. Athena, goddess of strategic warfare, represented everything Ares wasn't. She fought with intelligence, planning, purpose. Soldiers prayed to Athena before battle because she might actually help them win. Ares just showed up to revel in the chaos. Ares represented what happened when strategy failed, when formations collapsed, when fear and rage took over and men just hacked at each other until one side stopped moving. But here's what made Ares genuinely dangerous. He didn't care about sides. Athena supported the Greeks during the Trojan War with clear, strategic reasons. Poseidon had his grudges. Apollo protected those he favored. Ares? He just wanted violence. His relationship with Hera was complicated. He was one of her few legitimate children with Zeus, born from their actual marriage rather than one of Zeus's countless affairs. She championed him to Zeus out of spite and made excuses for his behavior, but she never truly had any love for him. It didn't matter. Love couldn't fix the fundamental problem. Ares was the antithesis of everything Olympus claimed to stand for. But here's what makes Ares fascinating, rather than simply pathetic. He didn't change. Despite the constant rejection, the mockery, the clear message that nobody wanted him around, he remained exactly what he was. Other gods adapted, played politics, cultivated followers. Ares just kept being the god of violence, even though it guaranteed his isolation. His temples were rare, built mostly in Sparta, a city that valued martial prowess above everything else. His worship took on a different character in Sparta. The Spartans didn't avoid Ares or treat him as an embarrassment. They acknowledged him openly as a force that belonged at the heart of their society. In Sparta, a statue of Ares was kept bound in chains, a symbolic act meant to ensure that the spirit of war would remain within the city and never abandon its people in battle. Spartan rituals honored him alongside other martial deities, recognizing that discipline and strategy might guide an army. But the brutal reality of combat still required the presence of the god who embodied its violence. To the Spartans, Ares wasn't something to deny or distance themselves from. He was a power to be contained, respected, and kept ready whenever the city called its warriors to war. His love life became legendary, though not in ways that earned respect. His most famous affair was with Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, who happened to be married to Hephaestus. The symbolism practically writes itself: love and war, sneaking around together while the craftsman god worked in his forge. Hephaestus eventually discovered the affair through Helios, the all-seeing sun god. Instead of confronting them directly, he crafted an invisible net of unbreakable chains. When Ares and Aphrodite next met in secret, the net fell, trapping them together in the most compromising position possible. Then Hephaestus invited all the Olympians to come look. The gods gathered and laughed. Not polite chuckling, but roaring, mocking laughter at Ares caught naked. Apollo made jokes. Hermes said he'd happily endure such embarrassment for a chance with Aphrodite. The goddesses stayed away out of modesty, but you know they heard about it. Ares just lay there in the net, humiliated, unable to escape, while his family treated his pain as entertainment. Most gods would have plotted revenge, started a war, done something to reclaim dignity. Ares went right back to Aphrodite once Hephaestus freed him, because he genuinely loved her, not as conquest or possession, but as the one thing in his violent existence that felt different. She was beauty, pleasure, desire, everything war destroyed, and somehow she wanted him anyway. His relationship with Aphrodite makes more sense when you stop thinking of them as opposites. They're both primal forces that override rational thought. Love and war both make people abandon everything they claim to value. Both create obsession. Both can destroy you while making you feel more alive than you've ever felt. Hephaestus represented craft, patience, building things that last. Of course Aphrodite didn't want him. He was stability and reliability and everything that feels safe but not exciting. Ares was dangerous. Being with him meant risking everything. That's exactly what made him irresistible. Their affair produced harmonia, which initially seems like cosmic irony. How does war plus love equal harmony? But maybe harmony isn't the absence of conflict. Maybe it's the balance between opposing forces, the tension that holds things together precisely because it could tear them apart. They had several other children together, Phobos and Deimos, fear and terror, who accompanied their father into battle. Eros is commonly considered to be theirs as well. Each child represented some aspect of their union, mixing love's intensity with war's passion. But if you're waiting for this to become a redemption story, you'll be disappointed. Ares never learned gentleness from Aphrodite. He never became more strategic or disciplined. Their relationship didn't civilize him or make him palatable to the other Olympians. He remained the god everyone needed, but nobody wanted. And that contradiction would define every myth he appeared in, every battle he influenced, every moment where humans discovered that war doesn't care about your noble intentions. What happened when mortals actually tried to worship him properly reveals just how deeply uncomfortable his truth made everyone. Because acknowledging Ares meant acknowledging something about human nature that civilization desperately wanted to deny. The Spartans understood Ares better than any other Greeks. While Athens built temples to Athena and celebrated wisdom, Sparta erected a statue of Ares in chains, not to mock him, to bind him to their city. They wanted his power contained, controlled, always present, but never allowed to run wild. They knew something other Greeks refused to admit. War was part of them. Denying it didn't make it disappear. Most Greek cities avoided Ares worship entirely. They'd pray to Athena before battle because she represented strategy, the civilized version of violence. Praying to Ares felt like admitting you enjoyed killing, that you wanted the chaos, that beneath your philosophy and democracy, you were just another animal fighting for dominance. His presence in the Trojan War shows this perfectly. Ares sided with Troy, probably because Aphrodite supported them, and he followed her lead. Homer describes him raging across the battlefield, but accomplishing nothing strategic. He killed people. He spread panic. He made everything worse without changing the outcome. At one point, Athena guided a Greek soldier's spear into Ares. The war god gets stabbed, screams loud enough to match 10,000 men, and runs away. Athena mocks him to his face. The message couldn't be clearer. Intelligent warfare defeats mindless rage every time. Except that's not actually what happens in real wars. Strategy matters, sure, but battles are decided by men willing to push spears into other men's bodies. Someone has to do the actual killing. Athena can plan all day. Ares is the one who makes soldiers forget they're human long enough to commit violence. His children inherited his characteristics in disturbing ways. Phobos and Deimos weren't just fear and terror personified, they were what happens to human psychology in combat. The moment when training disappears and instinct takes over. When you realize you might die in the next 5 seconds and your body floods with chemicals that make you either fight like a demon or collapse completely. Cycnus, Ares' son by Pelopeia, became so obsessed with war, he built a temple to his father from the skulls of travelers he murdered. Heracles eventually killed him, but the story reveals something. Ares didn't teach his children to be better. He taught them to be exactly what they were, without apology or restraint. His temple in Athens existed, barely, tucked away, small, not exactly hidden, but not celebrated either. Soldiers would make offerings before campaigns, quick prayers for survival rather than lengthy ceremonies. Get in, acknowledge the god of war. Get out before anyone sees you spending too much time there. Compare that to the Parthenon, massive and central, proclaiming Athena's importance to everyone who looked. The architecture itself was a statement about which kind of warfare Athens valued. The kind with plans and purpose, not the kind that turned men into monsters. But battlefields don't care about architectural statements. When phalanxes collided, when bronze spears punched through bronze armor into flesh, when the entire world became screaming and blood, and the friend beside you suddenly had his intestines on the outside, Athena's wisdom felt very far away. Ares was right there in the horror, not guiding anyone to victory, just present in every moment where civilization's mask slipped and revealed the violence underneath. What nobody wants to acknowledge is that Ares never forced anyone to worship him. He didn't demand temples or threaten cities that ignored him. He just existed, waiting for the inevitable moment when humans would need violence again. Because they always did. That perpetual availability is what made him different from gods who needed constant validation. Zeus craved worship, threw tantrums when cities chose other patrons. Athena competed for devotion, literally fought Poseidon for Athens. Ares just waited. Cities would burn eventually. Armies would march. Someone would need the god who didn't flinch at what war actually required. His children reflected this acceptance of violence as natural state. Phobos and Deimos, fear and terror, weren't metaphorical concepts. They rode into battle beside their father. Physical manifestations of what happens to human minds when survival becomes the only thought that matters. Soldiers who faced them didn't just feel afraid. They experienced existential dread that made cowards of heroes and sent entire formations fleeing. The Amazons claimed descent from Ares, warrior women who rejected traditional roles, who built societies around combat capability rather than domestic expectations. Greeks told stories about them with mixture of fascination and horror. Women who fought like men, who valued strength over beauty, who chose warfare as identity. Of course they'd worship Ares. He didn't care about gender or propriety or any social construct that limited who could embrace violence. His Roman transformation into Mars revealed something Greeks refused to admit. Violence isn't separate from civilization. It's foundational. Rome didn't pretend otherwise. Their entire system depended on military expansion, on conquered peoples funding the empire, on legions maintaining order through overwhelming force. Making Mars central wasn't glorifying war. It was acknowledging reality. The month of March, named for Mars, marked when Roman military campaigns traditionally began. Spring meant renewed warfare, armies marching after winter's pause. Romans didn't hide this cycle or feel ashamed. They built it into their calendar, made it structural rather than aberrant. Greek city-states never achieved that honesty. They needed hoplites, depended on citizen soldiers, built their political systems around men who could afford armor and fight in formation. But they kept Ares at arm's length, pretending warfare was unfortunate necessity rather than defining characteristic. Sparta came closest to Roman acceptance. They built everything around military excellence, raised children in state-run training that turned them into perfect soldiers. Yet even Spartans didn't elevate Ares the way they elevated other gods. They acknowledged him, made offerings, but their identity centered on discipline and training rather than battle frenzy. Because that's what separated Spartan warfare from Ares. Spartans fought with cold precision, maintained formation under pressure, won through superior training rather than superior rage. That's Athena's territory again. Strategic violence versus chaotic violence. Controlled versus uncontrolled. Ares represented the moment when control breaks. When the phalanx shatters and it becomes individual combat. When training fails and instinct takes over. When you stop being a soldier executing tactics and become an animal trying not to die. Every warrior who survived long enough experienced that moment. The transition from fighting according to plan to fighting for breath. From following orders to pure reaction. That's when Ares was most present, in the space between discipline and survival. His unpopularity among gods mirrored his unpopularity among humans. Other Olympians found him distasteful, embarrassing. When Hephaestus caught Ares and Aphrodite together, he didn't just confront them. He trapped them in unbreakable chains and invited every god to witness their humiliation. They all came. They all laughed. Nobody defended Ares or suggested maybe public shaming went too far. That scene reveals the entire divine attitude toward him. He was useful when they needed muscle, when conflicts required someone willing to get bloody. But socially, he was the relative everyone tolerates at gatherings without actually wanting him there. Zeus's relationship with Ares carried particular contempt. Zeus openly disliked him, called him the most hateful of all gods in the Iliad, told him directly that his violent nature was intolerable. Imagine hearing that from your father, the king of gods who'd overthrown his own father through violence, who'd waged a decade-long war against the Titans, condemning his son for being violent. The hypocrisy was staggering. Zeus used violence constantly. He just dressed it up as justice or necessity or divine prerogative. Ares was honest about what he was. That honesty made everyone uncomfortable. Modern interpretations often try redeeming him, finding nobility in his honesty or strength in his acceptance of violence. That's missing the point. Ares doesn't need redemption. He is what he is, and what he is doesn't conform to frameworks where gods represent admirable qualities. He's the acknowledgement that humans are capable of terrible things. That civilization is thin veneer over capacity for violence that never really disappears. That the same hands that build can destroy and sometimes choose destruction. Every generation thinks they've evolved past needing gods like Ares. Every generation discovers they haven't. Wars change tactics and technology, but the fundamental experience remains. Fear, adrenaline, violence, survival, Ares territory. The Greeks were right to keep him at distance, not because he was evil, but because getting too comfortable with what he represented was dangerous. Societies that glorify war eventually consume themselves. Rome proved that, despite successfully integrating Mars, the empire that lived by the sword eventually couldn't sustain the constant warfare its existence required. But pretending violence doesn't exist, refusing to acknowledge the part of human nature that Ares embodied, that's equally dangerous. Denying the shadow doesn't eliminate it, just makes you unprepared when it emerges. Ares stood in that uncomfortable middle ground, too present to ignore, too disturbing to embrace. The god everyone needed and nobody wanted, still waiting on battlefields where philosophy fails and only survival matters. Every civilization tries to outgrow Ares. They build philosophies about just war, create rules for civilized conflict, pretend violence can be managed through proper thinking. Then someone picks up a weapon, and all those careful distinctions evaporate. He never demanded worship because he knew he'd always be relevant. War doesn't end because you stop believing in the god of war. It ends when humans fundamentally change what they are. That hasn't happened yet. Probably never will. And somewhere in the space between what we claim to be and what we become when survival demands it, Ares waits. Patient, honest, inevitable.